Hello everyone, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be covering my 2024 election prediction model to show you guys how I'm going to be using this to predict the 2024 presidential election. Now before we get started with the video, let's make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that post notification bell, and make sure to follow the Twitter and join the Discord in the description down below. And without further ado, let's get right into this video. And so pretty much, guys, this is an expanded battleground map based out of all the states that I've characterized as over 10 points, leaning in whatever direction. So for example, Colorado is about, I think it ended up being like a 10.5 point victory for Biden according to the model. So this is going to be characterized as safe, at least for this video, because I don't want to spend time doing every single state on the model. And so I'm going to do states that were characterized as under 10 points as of right now. And we're going to be filling out those states in the lean, tilt, and likely category. Tilt being under 1%, lean being between 1 to 5, and likely being 5 to 10 percentage points. And we're going to be going through all these swing states here and really looking at gauging what's going to really happen in these states. And then we have the big seven, which is Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. Those are the big seven states as of right now that are the closest states on the battleground map, according to 2020 and right now. And so pretty much the first state I'm going to be looking at is the state of New Mexico. If we go to New Mexico in my model, it is projected to be a 5-point victory for the incumbent president. Now, how does this go? The way I did this is you have the 2016 results with the 2020 results. It tracks the swing from 2016 to 2020, and it also looks at the trend and obviously the states by themselves, the way that the state trends is weighted, the way that Biden's approval rating, you can see incumbent party approval rating is also here too. That also affects the model as well. You can see the RCP average popular vote lead is also characterized here, and how much the popular vote swings in a certain direction also is affecting the model as well. So when you combine all of that, you get these results. And also I use a website called Swingometer from 2020, which kind of does the electoral map based off of demographics. And I basically kind of played around with the demographics to what I think is going to happen in the cycle, which I will go over in a little bit. And that gives me results from the electoral map, which are also averaged out into these results, and gives me my final margins in these states. So that's basically how I go about doing them. New Mexico is a state that voted against Trump by 8 points in 2016, and by 10 in 2020. And it looks like right now, Biden is only leading by 5. His, poll rating, his poll average is, only 8 points. The demographic poll only has Biden up by 2, and the state barely trended to the left the last cycle. And so any, underperformance, is really going to drag the average down. And that puts the state at a 5-point margin for President Biden as of right now, which puts the state in the likely Democratic category as of right now. The next state I'm going to be doing is the state of Virginia, which if we were to go to that, it is also considered roughly the same margin of victory as New Mexico. They're roughly right around each other, which is what happened in 2020. In 2020, they basically voted in line with each other, and Virginia was the closer one. However, this cycle, it seems like Virginia will be the one voting to the left of New Mexico, probably because there's a lot more Hispanics in New Mexico that are probably voting for Trump than white suburban college women or suburban women in general would be voting for somebody like Trump. So that explains the very minute, difference in some of these swings here. Biden leading in the polling average here by just 4.3%. The state has trended left, and the demographic, result only has Biden up by 2 points. And so that probably drags his performance down just a little bit in the state. And he leads by basically exactly 5%, which puts him in the likely category. So I don't think that as of right now, Trump's probably going to have a chance in Virginia. The next state I want to do is New Hampshire. That state is a 4.4 percentage point victory for Biden. The demographic result only has him up by 0.4. The polling average has him up by 8 percentage points. The result in 2016 was very small, including the 2020 shift was a big difference. That swung the state 7 points to the left. However, the trend was about 1.3% to the left. And that kind of puts the state, just leaning a little bit more Democratic than what it was in 2016. But I think that it is going to vote for Biden. I have Biden winning it by about 3 or 4 points. So I think this characterization may actually be pretty accurate as of right now. The next state I'm going to be tackling is the state of Maine, which is characterized as a 2.9 percentage point victory. The polling average technically has Trump up, but because of the demographic pool, the results, and the way the state has trended to the left, the last cycle, it is characterized as a leaning Democratic state, and we can put that in the lean category for Joe Biden. Now, Minnesota is a state that should be here. It's a 3.5 point victory for Biden. He's winning in the lean category as of right now. The state did, barely vote for Clinton in 2016. It swung to the left by a lot and actually trended to the left by quite a bit. And the polling average has Biden up by 3. The demographic pool has Biden up by 1.4. And so because of that, he's up in the state by 3.5 points. You could see the state massively swung to the left, between election cycles. However, third-party candidates could have been affecting this result. And really, it may not be that far off, but we'll kind of wait and see on election day. And right now, the model has Biden up by 3.6 percentage points approximately, and that puts him in the lean category in Minnesota. Now we are down to the Big 7 plus Nebraska second, which Nebraska second, I do have Biden winning it by 3 points as of right now. It is a left trending district, and you can see I even have the results for the district. You see it trended for almost 4 points to the left in 2020. And so that's going to push the district a lot further to the left than it initially would have. And so now we're coming down to these states. The first swing state I want to look at is the state of Wisconsin. The state of Wisconsin has Trump at a 4.2 percentage margin of victory, which is very interesting. This state, very white working class kind of state. Trump was able to win it because he was able to win Door County. He won Sauk and, Kenosha County. He even did pretty good in Ozaukee, kind of ran up the margins in some of the more deeper blue counties, for example. Biden was able to win it because he was able to make gains in Sauk County. He was able to win Door back. He managed to make a county like, Winnebago County a little bit closer. Ozaukee was a lot closer than what it was in 2016. And that kind of propelled them to a victory in the state. And so now, with a lot of room for Trump to really grow in some of the white working class areas, and Biden's disapproval rating, the popular vote swinging so much to the right, the state is projected to be a 4.2 percentage point victory according to my model. Now, do I think it's going to go to Trump by 4.5 points? Probably not. I have Trump winning the state by at most 1.5 right now, but we'll kind of wait and see on that. I mean, right now I have it, the model currently has it as a 4.2 percentage point victory for the former president as of right now. The next state I'm going to be looking at is the state of North Carolina, which actually has the former president winning it by 7.2 percentage points. If you look at this, the demographic pool is 7.5 in the state. The polling average has him up by 4.6%. The result in 2016 had Trump up by 3.7, then had Trump up by 1.3% in 2020. The swing from 2016 to 2020 is 2.4 points Democratic, and the trend is barely to the left. Actually, the state only trends 0.19 percentage points towards Biden, and so that's not necessarily a big enough trend needed to make the state really trend in a certain direction. And so because of that, you are going to see major shifts in a state like North Carolina, especially since it voted for Trump but in a year where everything was going wrong for him. And now that the popular vote is shifting 4 or 5 points in a certain direction, and plus the polling average has him up by quite a bit, and the demographic pool has him up substantially in the state, you could see in North Carolina he's actually doing a 7-point margin of victory there. Georgia is a state that is considered lean on the model. It is voting for Trump by 3.5 points. The demographic poll has him up by 9.8%. The polling average has him up by 3.8%. The 2016 result was 5.1, and the 2020 result was a tilt Biden margin. And you could see that the swing from 2016 to 2020 was a 5-point swing, which is a pretty big swing, in a certain direction. And the trend in the state is a 7.5-point trend. And so that is why it is lean R on this map. The trending factor is weighted pretty heavily on the map just to kind of ensure, error bias or whatever. So Georgia would actually go Democrat in this model before Pennsylvania, which I find kind of weird. Hopefully some tweaking happens, and maybe because now Arizona's polling average is a lot higher than it was in Georgia, even though just a couple weeks ago they were basically the same. And we're going to go over Arizona in a second because that state might actually end up being pretty interesting. The next state, we'll just do Arizona right now. It is voting for Trump in my model by 5.2 percentage points, which is a pretty big margin in the state considering Biden was actually able to win it, by a pretty substantial amount. And if you look at this, the demographic poll has them up 6.4%. The polling average has them up 4.5%. The result in 2016 to 2020, was a 3-point, almost 4-point shift to Democrats, but the trend was a lot less than a state like Georgia. And I think that's why the state is voting to the left or voting to the right by so much. If you really think about it, it makes sense. The national environment is tied. Last time when Biden almost won it by 5, it was still. And so right now, for the national environment to be tied and Trump barely be winning it by over 5 kind of makes sense. And even with the polling average being that high, it may be because the border issue is actually kind of inflating the margin there. If you were to actually make the average the same as Georgia, it would drag the state below a 5-point victory. So the fact of the border issue affecting a state like Arizona may actually be pushing it a couple points to the right. And so as of right now, I have the state as a 5.2 percentage margin of victory for the former president, according to my latest model. The next state is Nevada, which has Trump up by 4.7%. Trump is performing significantly better with Hispanics this cycle, and that may be, reflected in the polling lead because he's actually outperforming in the polling average compared to the demographic poll, even though I have shifted Hispanics massively to the right. And Biden, of course, there was a 0-point swing from 2016 to 2020, the exact same result. And the trend was 2.4 percentage points Republican. And so that's probably why the state votes, so red compared to some of these other states. For, like a Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania, for example, the trend there is really hard, was a really hard trend for Republicans overall. And that may be what pushing the state. And that puts Trump at 278 electoral votes automatically. If you were to go to Michigan, he's up by 2.9% in the state. The demographic poll actually has him up by 3. He's up in the state by 2.8%. In 2016, he barely won it. He lost it by 3 in 2020, which shifted the state 3 points to the left and trended the state like half a point Democrat. But with Biden's unpopularity and overall just, not being able to turn out certain voters, and the swing of the popular vote and Trump being in a tied national environment, that is going to push the state to vote for Trump by almost 3 percentage points. Pennsylvania is the final state on this average that we needed to fill out, and that has, Trump up, by 3.7%. So he's actually winning the average by about 3.7. According to my estimated prediction. He's up in the demographic poll by 2.7%. He's down in the polling aggregate by 0.1. He won it in 2016, barely lost it in 2020. That shifted the state. It swung the state Democrat, but the trend was actually still Republican, which was interesting, looking at it on a national scale. And so that might actually affect, the state of Pennsylvania into voting lean Republican. And so when you finally look at this map, it shows Trump winning by, 312 to 226 electoral college votes, but he's even winning Arizona by over 5 points according to my latest model. Now, do I think this is the result? In terms of the electoral college margins, yes, but in terms of, the state margins? Not necessarily. I mean, I could see Wisconsin voting lean Republican, but Michigan and Pennsylvania, I'm a little bit iffy on that. Same thing for like Nevada and Arizona. Even North Carolina voting by 7 points. I don't know if I could see that happening. Now, I do see Colorado being likely. Same thing for like Oregon. I think Alaska's likely. Texas, Florida. These are all under 15-point margins. So I could see that being the case. Same thing in Maine, for example, and like even like New Jersey is under a 15-point margin. This is what the model looks like if you were to do it by. I believe if you were to do my model by, a 15-point scale, this is what the model would look like. So Oregon, I think Washington even falls under the 15-point category, and so does Illinois. So my model looks a little different when you do it on a plus 15 scale. This is roughly where it looks like. Biden's actually not performing too badly in some of these northeastern states. The only reason why New Jersey is likely is because there was a poll that came out that has Biden only up by 7, and so that's dragging Biden way down in the state. If the polling average wasn't out, he'd be leading by, a safe margin according to my model. But because that average did come out, Biden is only ahead. I think he's ahead in the average by like 10 or something like that. Not even. He's only ahead in the average by like 9 points. And that's with the demographic poll being higher than the polling average. And the state has technically trended to the right, so that might be pushing the aggregate further there. So that is pretty interesting. And I'm kind of curious to see what it's going to look like when you have more polling averages out of these states as well overall. And once you have like Maine at large, for example, this is looking really iffy for Biden, because the latest poll had Trump up by 6 in the state, and that's a problem overall. Now, the demographic poll is considerably more Democratic than the polling average, but this may be a surprise state for Trump that could end up flipping, that people may or may not expect to exactly happen. I think that out of the model, you can basically see, like Arizona, for example, is interesting because even though the trend has been pretty Democratic, the polling, I think the demographic poll, Trump doing better with Hispanics, I think is actually pulling the average up a little bit. You could even make the case that that'd be the same for Nevada, whereas Georgia, it actually wouldn't make a sense because African Americans may not be moving to the right by as much as we think they are. And so this cycle, Arizona may actually vote to the right of Georgia because of Trump doing just better with Hispanics, and other things. I actually forgot to put Hawaii as safe Democrat. I don't know why it had just flipped. I don't remember changing it. But if you really think about it, it is kind of weird to see Georgia vote, to the right of, for example, or vote to the left of Arizona, because typically it was the other way around. Even in 2020, it was the other way around. It was more Republican than Arizona. But this year, it may actually make more sense for Arizona to be more Republican than Georgia, because Trump is significantly doing more better with Hispanics than doing better with African Americans. Trump may only get like 15 to 20%, and I'm thinking he gets about 16%. So that is fueling some of the results here as well from the polling average. And so because of that, he might actually be in a really iffy situation where he may not even be winning. Biden might be cooked, in a place like Arizona because of Hispanics, or like Nevada, for example. And it kind of makes more sense because in terms of actual raw votes, Arizona was the closest state, according to this. So realistically, if you were to actually shift this back to the 2020 results, we could actually look at that right now. If you were to shift this back to the 2020 map, it's actually really funny, but Trump actually barely loses the electoral college here. And funny enough, not only that, he actually wins Nevada as well. He actually picks up Nevada for some reason. You could see that, okay, some of these states, are going to still be safe red, but, some of them will be closer. If we look at, like, for example, Maine's 2nd district is an 8-point win only. We'll keep going, looking for some of these. South Carolina's right below that 15-point margin. A lot of these are still safe. So it's looking a little bit like 2016 in a way. Kansas is right below the 14-point win. So you will see this, and it is going to remind you a lot of 2020. Iowa and Ohio are literally only 9-point victories. Texas and Florida are like bigger wins than 2020, which would be expected in a similar environment. Alaska is only a 9.5-point win. North Carolina is still a 2.5 margin of victory, which is also something I'd expect out of the state in this kind of environment as well. So the model may be fairly accurate to even like a 2020 environment. Minnesota being more Democrat with the same popular vote as 2020 would make a lot of sense in my personal opinion. Illinois is safe. All these Democratic states would basically end up being safe. I mean, there's no reason for them to really be voting the way that they usually end up voting, or at least voting under a certain margin of victory. I think it would make complete sense. I think Maine is also a state that would end up going back into the likely column. Nebraska second would be more Democratic than before. New Hampshire would be more Democratic. Virginia would be slightly less Democratic, which is interesting. It'd be right below the 10-point margin of what it was before. New Mexico would be a little bit closer because Trump would still do better with Hispanics, but Colorado would almost be a 15-point win in this scenario. And if you were to go to the actual swing states, Trump's actually winning Nevada by 0.11%, winning Arizona by just barely by half a point. He's losing Georgia by 1, and he loses Michigan by like 1.5, but he loses Pennsylvania and Wisconsin by tilt margin. So this is what the map would look like according to the model, with the same popular vote victory that Biden got last time. If you were to win the popular vote by 4.5 points, this is what you would be looking at in terms of an electoral college result. And all Trump would really need to win is Pennsylvania. That is the only state he'd actually need to win in this scenario. I just think it's kind of funny Georgia goes lean Dem while Arizona's going tilt Republican. I just think that's kind of funny, and I don't know why the model's doing that. But maybe if I look further into it, there could be a possible explanation. But let's say hypothetically Biden wins the popular vote by 4.5 points. This is what the model is actually showing me, is that he'd actually win with 286 electoral college votes, meaning that if he were to only win the popular vote by 4 points, he'd effectively lose the election, or almost lose the election, because he'd end up losing Wisconsin at that point, and Georgia would fall under, that kind of margin. Pennsylvania would effectively be extremely close. And so at this point, he's about to be cooked. And if, let's say 3.5 or whatever, at that point, Wisconsin basically goes Republican at that point. So basically, it would go Republican. Georgia still wouldn't go, which is kind of interesting, and Michigan wouldn't either. Georgia still wouldn't flip, but Trump would be winning the electoral college, 281 to 257. So I think that is actually pretty interesting that Pennsylvania votes to the right of Georgia, even according to my model as of right now. I would have thought so last year that would have been the case, but it doesn't even seem like it'd be the case this time. And even a state like Illinois may not even be safe, on this kind of map. Let's actually look. You see, it doesn't even vote safe Democrat. It's actually likely Democratic on the map as of right now. So even Illinois wouldn't even vote by a similar amount that what it did back then. So that's also pretty interesting as well, looking at it from that perspective electorally. And so even if Biden were to win the popular vote by 4.5 points, you'd have roughly the same electorate as 2020, basically. And all these states would be up for grabs. He'd already be winning Nevada and Arizona, according to my model. He basically would need to win Pennsylvania. He could win a combination of Wisconsin and Georgia. So even in a scenario where Biden wins the popular vote by the same amount he did last time, Trump would still be in a good spot to win, because these would effectively be the closest states on the whole map. And even like his Kansas margin looks similar to 2020. South Carolina looks similar. All these victories look pretty similar to 2020. Even Illinois falls under 15. So even a scenario where Biden is winning the popular vote by the same amount he did last time, he would still roughly perform in line with 2020 and actually do worse in some states as of right now. Even in California and Hawaii, he'd be doing a little bit worse than what he did last time as well. Wisconsin, he'd do worse. He'd do worse in Michigan, do worse really across the board. The only state he'd actually improve in is Georgia. That'd be his only improvement from the previous election, and that'd probably be due to some like suburban votes out of Atlanta or whatever the case is. And so that's basically it for this video, guys. This is me kind of doing a general analysis on, you know, the electoral college map and what we're going to be looking at over the next couple of weeks. You know, if Trump was really winning the average by what he was winning it by beforehand, like with that big lead he had of a 4.3% lead in the national average, if he was really winning it by that much, by now he'd be winning in a state like Minnesota. New Mexico would be competitive, or New Hampshire would be in talks of voting, you know, Republican. Nebraska second would have flipped. He would have been flipping Maine at large at this point. New Jersey would fall under a 5-point victory. You know, Illinois would be falling under 5. New York would be an 11-point win. Oregon's under 10. Colorado is like a 6-point win. Georgia's like a 7-point victory for, you know, Biden. Pennsylvania. And they probably would be even bigger because the averages for all the states would probably be more Republican by the time that this would be happening. And so that would also be interesting to look at as well, you know, overall. But as of right now, I'm pretty sure this is where we're sitting at in terms of the electoral college. And so if you guys did enjoy the video looking at the presidential forecasting model, if you guys did enjoy this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, make sure to hit the post bell notification, and make sure to follow the Twitter and join the Discord in the description down below. And I hope to see you guys very, very soon.